The hands closed over my eyes from behind, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was alone in that room. I'd watched the door click shut. I'd stood there in the dark counting. And now there were two cold palms pressing against my face, and something was breathing into my ear like it had been waiting years for me to finally turn on the light. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back. Let me take you to the beginning, to the house I grew up in, and to the room at the end of the hall that I'm still afraid to think about, even now, even as a grown adult who should know better. We had a room in our house that was unlike any other. Not in the way it looked. That's the thing people always get wrong when I try to explain it. It wasn't painted black. It didn't have strange symbols on the walls or claw marks gouged into the floor. There was nothing about it, from the outside, that would make you hesitate. It was a plain room with a plain door and a plain brass knob, the kind you'd find in any house in any neighborhood in the country. What made it different was what it was for. It had exactly one purpose, and that purpose was punishment. My brother and I called it the timeout room, because that's what our parents called it, and when you're a child you inherit the names of things the way you inherit the color of your eyes. You don't question them. They just are. The timeout room sat at the very end of the upstairs hallway, wedged between the linen closet and the spare bedroom we never used. If you were a guest in our home, if you wandered up those stairs looking for the bathroom, you'd walk right past that door and never give it a second thought. You might assume it was storage. You might assume it was where we kept the Christmas decorations and the old winter coats. You would never, not in 1,000 years, guess what actually happened in there. But my brother and I knew. Oh, we knew. If we misbehaved, we went there. If we talked back, if we snuck cookies before dinner, if we fought too loudly or slammed a door in anger, the response was always the same. My mother never raised her voice. I want you to understand that. She never screamed, never lectured, never grabbed us by the arm and dragged us anywhere. My father never counted to 3 the way other fathers did. They never made threats. They never made deals. When we crossed a line, they simply lifted one hand and pointed down the hall. And we went. Every time, we went. Timeout room, my mother would say, and her voice was always so calm, so even, like she was reminding us to wash our hands or take off our shoes. Lights off. Door closed. That was the whole punishment. That was the entire ritual. You walked into the room, you turned off the light, though looking back, I'm not sure the light was ever really on to begin with, and you closed the door, and you stood there in the dark until you were allowed to come out. When you're little, this makes a kind of sense. Darkness is uncomfortable. It strips away all the distractions, all the toys and the television and the windows full of daylight, and it leaves you alone with nothing but yourself and your bad behavior. It makes you feel small. It makes you want to be good again so you can come back out into the light. I understood the logic of it even as a child, the way you understand that touching the stove hurts. It was a rule, and rules were simply how the world worked. For a long time, it really did feel normal. It felt like a strict but fair custom in a strict but fair house, and we accepted it the way we accepted bedtimes and vegetables and church on Sunday. My brother went in more often than I did, if I'm being honest. He had a temper. When it was his turn, I'd creep down the hallway after my parents had gone back downstairs, and I'd press my ear flat against the cool wood of the door, and I'd whisper to him. "How long you got?" Sometimes he'd whisper back a number. Sometimes he wouldn't answer at all. And sometimes, this is the part that bothers me most, now that I'm older, Sometimes I'd hear him sniffling on the other side of that door. A small, wet, hitching sound. And sometimes I'd hear absolutely nothing. A silence so complete and so total that I'd press my ear harder, straining, half convinced the room had somehow swallowed him whole and there was nobody left in there to make a sound. Then his time would be up. The door would open. He'd come out pale and quiet and would go straight to his room without a word. And I never asked him what it was like in there. Isn't that strange? We shared everything as kids, every secret, every fear. But we never once talked about that room. When my own turn came, the routine was always identical. My mother or father would point. I would walk that hallway. The carpet under my bare feet was a worn, oatmeal beige, and it grew thinner and colder the closer you got to the end of the hall, or at least that's how I remember it. And I would always open the door slowly and peer inside first. Not because I was supposed to. Because some animal part of me wanted to look before I committed, wanted to give my parents one last second to change their minds. They never did. Peering into that room from the hallway always felt wrong in a way I couldn't name as a child. The light from the hall would spill in across the floor, a fan of pale yellow that reached maybe 4 feet inside and then simply stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like it had hit a wall of something thicker than air. Beyond that line, there was nothing. No window. No furniture. No reason for anyone to ever go in there. Nothing except the lamp. There was a single tall standing lamp in the far corner of the room. An old-fashioned floor lamp with a heavy base and a long brass pole and a rough yellowed lampshade at the top, the fabric gone stiff and dusty with age. It stood there in the corner like a sentry, like it was guarding something, and it was the only object in the entire room. In the dim spill of hallway light you could just barely make out its silhouette, a darker shape against the dark, and I never once saw that lamp turned on. Not in all the years we lived there. I would step inside. I would close the door. And the soft, distinct click of it shutting behind me would seal me into the black. That click. I think about that click a lot. Because the door had no lock. I checked, years later, when I was old enough and brave enough to really look. There was no latch, no bolt, no mechanism of any kind that should have made that particular sound. But every single time, the door shut with a soft, final, deliberate click, the sound of something being secured. Then I'd stand there with my arms at my sides, staring into the perfect nothing, and I'd count the way kids count when they're trying to drag time forward by sheer force of will. 10 Mississippi. 20 Mississippi. 30 Mississippi. I never questioned any of it. That's what haunts me. I never asked why the room was so much darker than the rest of the house. I never wondered why no light ever leaked in under the door, not even the thinnest sliver, the way light always leaks in under every door everywhere. I never asked why there was a lamp at all if I was never permitted to turn it on. I never asked why the door clicked. The rules were simple, and to a child, rules are not opinions. They are not preferences. They are the architecture of reality itself. Darkness is the punishment. You do not turn on the light. As immovable as gravity. As certain as the sun coming up. But then you get older. And the older you get, the more those rules start to look less like physics and more like decisions somebody made. Less like fate. More like choices. And once you understand that a rule is a choice, you start to wonder what would happen if you chose differently. I was maybe 10, perhaps 11, the first time I decided I was done playing along. It was something petty that got me sent there. I'd talked back to my mother about something, I genuinely don't remember what, some small domestic injustice that felt enormous at the time. I remember the heat rushing into my face, the sharp electric satisfaction of saying the thing I wasn't supposed to say, and then the immediate, inevitable consequence. My mother's hand rising. Her finger pointing down the hall. Time-out room. And this time, something in me rebelled. I stomped down that hallway like I owned it, like the rules were mine to break, chin up, jaw set. I threw the door open instead of opening it slowly. I stepped inside with my shoulders back and my fists clenched. The door swung shut behind me. Click. The darkness swallowed me whole, the way it always did. And I stood there, defiant, and I waited for my eyes to adjust. They didn't. Now, here's the thing I'd never noticed before, never had cause to notice, because I'd always just stood there counting and waiting for my time to be up. Your eyes are supposed to adjust to darkness. It's how they work. After 10 or 15 seconds, even in a dark room at night, the shapes start to emerge. You see the faint gray rectangle of a window, the lighter strip beneath a door, the dim suggestion of your own hands if you hold them up to your face. The dark softens. It always softens. This dark did not soften. I stood there for what must have been a full minute, and the blackness in front of my eyes remained absolute. It wasn't like night. It wasn't even like closing your eyes, because when you close your eyes you still see colors, faint swirls and sparks of red and purple, the phantom activity of your own retinas. This was none of that. This was blank. A pure, total, manufactured nothing, like my eyes were wide open but somewhere, somehow, the sun itself had been switched off at the source. There was no light beneath the door. None. And I realized, standing there, that there had never been any light beneath that door, and that this was deeply, profoundly strange, and that I had simply never thought about it before. That should have been enough. That should have sent me pounding on the door, begging to be let out. But I was 11 and I was angry and I was, for the first time, curious. There was a lamp in here. I knew there was. I'd seen it 100 times in the spill of hallway light. So why couldn't I see even the faintest outline of it now? Why couldn't I see anything at all? I lifted my hands and started feeling the air in front of me, taking small careful steps into the void. The carpet was strangely cold under my feet, colder than the hallway, colder than it had any right to be. My fingertips found a wall, the flat cool surface of painted drywall, and I pressed my palm against it and used it to guide myself sideways, shuffling toward the corner where I knew the lamp stood waiting. My fingers brushed fabric. Rough, stiff, dusty fabric. The lampshade. I slid my hand down the pole, found the socket, found the little turn switch on the side of it, a small ridged knob between my thumb and forefinger. And my heart knocked once, hard, against my ribs. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was the thrill of it. The pure, illicit thrill of breaking the one rule that had governed my entire childhood. The thrill of making a choice that was mine and mine alone. I think it may have been the first real decision I ever made for myself, standing there in that impossible dark with my fingers on that switch. I turned it. It clicked. I heard the click, and beneath it I heard a faint electrical buzzing, the sound a lamp makes when it comes to life. The sound of current finding a filament. But nothing changed. I blinked into the black. Hard. Then again. Then a third time, squeezing my eyes shut and opening them wide as if I could physically force the room into focus. Still nothing. Still the total, blank, suffocating dark. A cold little bead of uncertainty formed in my stomach. The lamp had clicked. I'd felt the switch turn, I'd heard it engage, I'd heard the buzz of electricity. So why was it still perfectly, impossibly black? My mind scrambled for an answer, the way a child's mind does, reaching for the ordinary. The bulb. Of course. The bulb must be missing, or loose, or burned out. That was all. A dead bulb. I reached up, sliding my fingers along the inside of the shade, feeling for the bulb in its socket. And I found it. Smooth glass under my fingertips. I pressed my fingers gently against it to check if it was loose. And I yanked my hand back so fast that I nearly fell. The bulb was hot. It was hot, which meant it was working, which meant it was on, which meant that somewhere above me in that corner a bulb was burning bright and pouring out light, and I still could not see a single thing. My mouth went dry. The saliva just vanished, gone, leaving my tongue thick and useless. And my first thought, the very first explanation my 11-year-old mind could produce, was childish and yet so much more terrifying for being so plausible, so real-world, so possible. What if I couldn't see anymore? What if something had happened to me, in this room, in this dark? What if I'd gone blind? I lifted my hands in front of my face, inches from my nose. Nothing. I waved my fingers frantically back and forth. Nothing. Not the slightest suggestion of movement, of shape, of the pale shadow my own hands should have cast. I squeezed my eyes shut and snapped them open again, wide, willing the light to pour back in. And the darkness stayed. My breathing was getting louder now. I could hear it in the silence, the only sound in that dead room, ragged and quick as the confusion in my chest curdled into the first real edges of panic. In and out. In and out, faster and faster. And that's when I noticed it. The rhythm of my breathing didn't quite line up anymore. It sounded wrong. Doubled, somehow. Off by a fraction of a beat. So I did the thing you do, the instinctive thing. I held my breath. I clamped my mouth shut and froze and went absolutely still and silent to listen. And the breathing didn't stop. There was another breath in that room. A faint, wet inhale, slow and deliberate, the breath of someone trying very hard to be quiet. And it was coming from behind me. Have you ever felt like something was watching you? That prickle on the back of your neck, that primal certainty that you are not alone even when every rational part of your brain insists you are? Tell me in the comments, because I need to know I'm not the only one who's felt it. Because in that moment, in that room, that feeling wasn't a vague unease. It was a fact. It was as solid and real as the wall under my hand. I turned around. Slowly, every muscle screaming, I turned to face the breathing. And the breathing was still behind me. I turned again, faster this time, spinning toward the sound. And still it came from behind. It wasn't moving around the room. It wasn't bouncing off the walls, no echo, no direction I could chase. It was simply, always, behind me. Right behind me. No matter which way I faced. Breathing. My breath stopped completely, and in that perfect held silence I could hear it with horrible clarity. At first it was slow, controlled, the careful breath of something that had been patient for a very long time. And then, as if it knew I'd finally heard it, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment, it sped up. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Closer than close. The kind of close you don't hear so much as feel, a warmth and a wetness against the back of your neck, a presence pressing into the space your body claims as its own. I wanted to call out. I wanted to scream for my mother, for my father, for my brother, for anyone. I opened my mouth. But something deeper and older than thought stopped me, because some animal part of my brain already understood, with total certainty, that whatever was behind me was not my mother, was not my father, was not anyone who had ever loved me. Then I felt the pressure on my face. Soft, at first. Gentle. Like a blanket shifting against my skin. And the worst part, the part that still wakes me up some nights with my heart slamming, was that it didn't feel like something had just been placed there. It felt like it had always been there, resting against me, and had only just now decided to move. Like it had been touching my face the entire time and I simply hadn't known. Then it grew firmer. More specific. Two distinct shapes, pressing over my eyes. One over each. Not cloth. Not a hood. Not a blanket. Hands. Two hands, one cupped over each of my eyes, palms sealed flat against my face. My entire body locked up, rigid, every muscle seizing at once. And the breathing was right at my ear now, rapid and hungry and eager, the breathing of something thrilled, something that had waited so long and was finally getting what it wanted. Or maybe not thrilled. Maybe furious. In the dark I couldn't tell the difference, and I'm not sure there was one. I reached up and grabbed at the hands covering my eyes. And I will never, as long as I live, forget how they felt. They were wrong. Too cold, far too cold, the cold of something that had never been warm. And too smooth. Not skin. Not quite. More like rubber that had been left to soak in ice water until every trace of life had leached out of it. The fingers were thin. Unnaturally thin. Long and thin like the bones of something that had never seen the sun. I yanked at them. I twisted. I dug my own small fingers under theirs and pulled with everything I had, and they did not move. Not an inch. They clung to my face with a strength that made no sense for fingers that thin, a grip like cold iron, and the panic finally broke loose in me, rising up my throat like a scream that hadn't found its voice yet. I started to flail. I swung my elbows back over my shoulders, blind, desperate, trying to hit whatever was pressed against my back, whatever those hands were attached to. My elbow connected with something solid behind my head. And it screeched. I have never, before or since, heard a sound like that. It was not a human sound. It was not an animal sound. It was the sound of metal dragging across metal, of rusted iron grinding against rusted iron, a shriek so loud and so sharp that my ears rang instantly, a high screaming tear of noise that felt like it was slicing my skull open from the inside. It filled the entire room, filled my whole head, drowned out my own thoughts. I screamed back, pure reflex, terror and pain pouring out of me, and I threw my arms backward harder, clawing, punching blindly at the thing latched onto me. And it answered. It bit me. Sharp teeth, so many of them, sank into the meat of my body where my neck met my shoulder. I felt a sudden tearing heat, a white-hot agony like a row of needles being driven into my flesh and then dragged, pulling, and I howled and my knees buckled beneath me. The world stayed black. Those cold rubber hands were still sealed over my eyes, and now the thin fingers were starting to curl, to dig, to push into the sockets, and the screech was still drilling into my brain, and the teeth were still buried in my shoulder, and I could feel my strength pouring out of me onto that cold carpet. I screamed until my voice cracked and split and finally gave out entirely. Gone. Just gone. My throat scraped raw and silent. If this story is keeping you up, if your heart is pounding the way mine was on that floor, then subscribe, because we post new horror like this every single night, and trust me, this is far from the worst thing I've ever had to tell. And in the sudden absence of my own screaming, in that ringing silence, I could hear the lamp. The buzzing. That electrical hum from the corner, except now it was so much louder than when I'd first turned the switch. It had grown. It was swelling, filling the room, a deep angry electric drone that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I tried to throw myself forward. I wanted to find the door, to crash into it, to claw my way out into the light. But the thing was still fastened to my neck, its teeth still in me, its weight dragging me back. The buzzing climbed higher and higher. My head was swimming. The room began to tilt and spin in the dark, my body starting to sway. My consciousness going thin and gray at the edges, and I thought, with a strange and distant calm, that I was going to die in this room and no one would ever know what had. The door flew open. I heard it swing wide and slam against the wall with a crack that cut clean through the buzzing. I still couldn't see a thing. But I felt it. I felt the change in the room, a sudden warmth across my face, a shift in the pressure of the air, the way a room feels different the instant another person enters it. Footsteps came. Fast and heavy across the carpet. No gasp. No scream. No voice at all. No, what's happening, or, oh my God, or, let go of my baby. Just movement, swift and certain and silent, the footsteps of someone who knew exactly what they were walking into. And then a solid impact, right behind my head. A heavy, meaty blow. The hands ripped off my eyes in an instant, the thin fingers scratching deep gouges down my cheeks as they tore away. The thing shrieked again, but this time the screech cut short, strangled, choked off, and then it was gone, retreating, vanishing, a sound like an echo sucked backward down a long metal pipe until there was nothing left of it at all. I collapsed forward onto the carpet. Gasping. Clawing at my own face, at my burning, bleeding neck. And I blinked and I blinked and I blinked. And the darkness stayed. I still couldn't see. I still could not see anything at all. Then there were arms around me. Real arms, warm arms, pulling me up off the floor and against a soft chest, wrapping around me as if to shield me from the room itself. My mother. Her hands were warm. Human. Real. The realest thing in the world. It's okay, she said. And her voice, that's the thing I keep coming back to, her voice was so calm. So steady and level and unsurprised. It's okay. It's okay. You're okay. I was shaking so violently my teeth were clicking together. I can't see, I choked out, my ruined voice barely a whisper. Mom, I can't see, I know, she said softly. She was rocking me, slow and gentle, the way you rock an infant. I know. Just breathe. Just breathe for me. The hallway smelled like laundry detergent and the dinner cooking downstairs. Normal smells. Safe smells. The smells of an ordinary house on an ordinary evening. My mother's shirt was pressed against my cheek, and I could feel her heartbeat through it, and it was slow. Steady. Even. Not the racing, terrified heartbeat of a mother who has just found her child being attacked in the dark. It was the heartbeat of someone who had been expecting this. Of someone who had, perhaps, been waiting just outside that door the whole time. I squeezed my eyes shut one more time and forced them open. And the hallway snapped into place around me. Light. Glorious, ordinary light. The oatmeal carpet. The cream-colored walls. The open door of the linen closet. My mother's face above mine, pale but composed, her eyes fixed steadily on me, and not, I noticed, on the room. Never once on the room. I sobbed and clung to her like a drowning child clings to anything that floats. And then, over her shoulder, past her, I could see into the timeout room. She'd pulled me out into the hallway without my even realizing it, and now I could see clearly into the place where I just nearly died. The lamp was on. The shade glowed a warm, soft yellow, casting light across the floor and the walls, an utterly ordinary lamp in an utterly ordinary empty room. Except the room was wrong. Even lit, even bright, it was wrong. It wasn't dark anymore. It was something worse than dark. It was deep. Too deep. The corners didn't seem to end where the walls should have been. The shadows behind the lamp stretched back farther than the room could possibly allow, as though there was more space inside that little room than the house had ever had to give it, as though it opened onto somewhere else entirely. I stared into it, my vision still swimming and blurring, and the geometry of it made my stomach turn. And then I blinked, and blinked again, and the room seemed to fold itself back into something reasonable. The corners found their walls. The shadows shrank back to their proper size. It was just a room again. Just a lamp. Just an empty space at the end of the hall. My mother shifted her body, deliberately, blocking my view. Her hand came up and pressed gently against the back of my neck, and I flinched and cried out at the fresh bolt of pain from the bite. But she didn't pull her hand away to look at the wound. She didn't ask me what had happened. She didn't go into the room to check the lamp. She didn't look for whatever had bitten me, didn't search the corners, didn't call for my father. She just held me and rocked me and whispered that everything was okay, over and over and over, until my breathing finally began to slow and my sobs dissolved into hiccuping, exhausted silence. When I finally pulled back far enough to look at her face, I expected to see something there. Anger, maybe. Or confusion. Or fear, the wild fear of a parent who has just witnessed something impossible. But there was none of that. What I saw instead was a kind of tired, practiced patience. The weary expression of someone watching a storm finally arrive that they had known, for a very long time, was coming. "Why is that room like that?" I whispered. My mother's thumb moved across my cheek, wiping away a tear, smearing the thin lines of blood the fingers had left there. "Because," she said quietly, "it works." That was all. That was the entire answer. No explanation. No apology. No comfort beyond her warm arms and her steady voice. What would you have done, if your own mother had said that to you? I still wonder about it to this day. I wonder if there was a right thing to say, a question that would have cracked it all open. But I was a child, and I was hurt, and I said nothing at all. She carried me away from that doorway, down the hall, toward the light and the warmth and the smell of dinner. And when I looked back over her shoulder one last time, she reached out without breaking stride and pulled the timeout room door closed behind us. Click. I never told my brother what happened in there. And he never asked. I think now that he didn't need to ask, that he already knew, that he'd known for years, ever since the first time those cold hands found him in the dark. I think that's why he came out so pale and so quiet. I think that's why, some nights, I'd press my ear to that door and hear nothing at all. The bite on my neck healed slowly over the following weeks. It scarred. A small crescent of pale, raised tissue where my neck meets my shoulder, a curve of little points, and it's still there. I can show it to you, if you ever meet me. You have to look closely, but it's there. A row of small marks in the shape of a mouth that was never supposed to exist. The timeout room stayed exactly where it was, at the end of the upstairs hallway, between the linen closet and the spare bedroom. The lamp stayed in its corner. The rule never changed. Lights off, door closed. My parents never spoke of what happened, and neither did I. And I'll give you the tidy little ending that everyone always wants, the neat resolution, the moral of the story. Because it's true, every word of it. I never misbehaved again. Not once. Not ever. I became the most well-behaved child you could possibly imagine, polite and quiet and obedient, and I carried that obedience with me out of that house and into my adult life, and I have never been able to fully shake it. Because my mother was right. She was right all along. It works. I still don't know what was in that room. I don't know if my parents put it there, or found it there, or made some quiet arrangement with it long before my brother and I were ever born. I don't know if every house has a room like that and most people are simply lucky enough never to turn on the light. I don't know what would have happened to me if my mother hadn't been waiting just outside that door. And I don't know, and this is the thought that keeps me up at night, even now, even as a grown adult who should know better. I don't know what that thing is doing now that the house is empty and there are no more children left to send into the dark. Whether it's still in there, in the corner, behind the lamp, breathing slowly, patiently, waiting for the next person foolish enough to disobey. Whether it remembers me. Whether it's still hungry. Subscribe for more horror every single night. And if you want more stories that will keep you up, check out What the Wow Stories for the wildest relationship drama you've ever heard. Link below. Sleep well.